Okay, I know what you're thinking. Testing isn't the most exciting thing when talking about iOS development, but it's in my opinion one of the really important things to talk about, because in most professional settings, and even when working on personal or independent projects, you'll most likely spend a significant portion of your time working on testing. News of testing features and changes are a good sign of a healthy and evolving platform, and often aim to reduce friction or create more efficiency while testing, which are both great news for professional developers. So with that in mind, today I want to take a look at what was announced regarding testing with Xcode 13 at WWDC 2021. And I know I'm a little bit late to the party, but there's a lot to unpack after that week, so I apologize for that. But before we take a look at that, I'd like to take a second to thank this video's sponsor. If you want to make the most out of the Xcode 13 features mentioned in this video as soon as possible, you should take a look at Codemagic, the only CI/CD tool that currently supports the latest Xcode 13 beta version. Easy to use, well documented, and with accessible and direct support through a Slack channel, Codemagic is a fantastic tool you should look into for all your CI/CD needs as a mobile developer. Whether you're using native Android, iOS, or cross-platform stacks like Flutter and React Native, and whether you prefer hosting your code on GitHub or GitLab, Codemagic has got you covered. Go take a look at it with the link in the video description below. And if you want to take a look at any of the things I talk about in today's video, there will be a ton of links down below to the material that was shared at WWDC. If you're interested in any of those topics, I invite you to go check these out to learn about them in more detail. The biggest news that came out of WWDC for testing has to be, without a doubt, the announcement of Xcode Cloud, Apple's own solution to CI/CD workflows to build apps on Apple's platforms. At this point in time, Xcode Cloud is still in beta access, which I don't have access to, so it's hard for me to comment on the small details of the platform, but from the information that was made available to everyone, Xcode Cloud is so far looking like an interesting option for smaller developers that want a more easily manageable and first-party option to manage their CI/CD tools, with support to do most basic operations you would do with these types of tools, like automatic builds and tests on pull requests, for example, but also automatic deployment to testers through TestFlight. It will probably cover all the needs of small teams or solo developers. And as is the case with most first-party tools from Apple, we'll probably be looking at trading some more advanced tools and options in favor of ease of use and ease of setup. Developers will have to decide for themselves if that trade-off is worth it. And although it's fantastic news in my opinion, because of that reason, I doubt it will mean the end of third-party CI/CD tools for iOS development. Not to mention that if you're working on a team that supports both iOS and Android apps, for example, having your CI/CD flows be split between two different systems or tools is probably going to be a really hard sell. We'll just have to wait and see how it turns out when it's more readily available for us to try out and test. Number 2, and my god, what great news that was, the introduction of async await pattern to more easily write asynchronous code and manage concurrency. If you've written asynchronous code in Swift before, you'll know that things can get very verbose and fairly complicated pretty quickly, as you oftentimes end up having to embed multiple completion handlers, for example, to get the expected results. On top of being a bit confusing to write, it also leaves the door open to human errors, because Swift doesn't have a way to notify you if some paths through your code don't result in calling a completion handler when it should have. That can lead to parts of your app being stuck in transitional states forever in some scenarios because a completion handler was never called when it should have. While async await doesn't magically make it so all the asynchronous code you'll write from now on will be perfect, it does close that door for human error and forces all paths through your code to either return a value or throw an error, which means the compiler can now catch your errors instead of having them fail silently. Anyway, the goal here isn't to teach you about async await and how to use it, so if that didn't make all that much sense, don't worry, just go watch the WWDC introduction talk on it and it'll make a lot more sense very quickly. Now what that means for testing, it's the subject of this video after all, it's a lot cleaner and easier to write, less verbose test cases that let go of having to use completion handlers and to manually pick through their results to see if the function returned an error or if you received the expected result at all. I'll leave you with a quick example I've read on mochacoding.com, which you should definitely take a look at if you're interested in learning about testing in more detail with Swift, which perfectly showcases how much cleaner and more elegant writing synchronous tests become when using async await. From very verbose code to manage completion handlers and picking through their potential errors to clean functions that either return an expected value or throw an error, as normal non-asynchronous function would look and would be tested. Another really fun feature that is going to be added to Xcode, which might not look like much at first, but is fantastic news to make testing more seamless and easy: test repetition. A way to create different testing scenarios which will run a same test multiple times, for example, until you get a failure. So here's the thing: writing code that works in a vacuum is already hard enough. Writing tests to make sure that code works too is also sometimes difficult. And when you have to take into consideration the whole environment your code is running in, and the different more or less unknown states it might be working with at any given time, you sometimes encounter errors that sometimes happen and sometimes don't. Maybe the speed of a certain system makes it so your code works 99% of the time because it avoids concurrency issues you have. Or maybe you wrote a test for a piece of code and it seems to pass every time you run it, but for some reason you keep getting error reports from people that are manually testing the feature. Test repetition allows you to create testing scenarios that take into account the idea your test might not have a 100% definitive result, either because your code doesn't or because your test doesn't. Either way, it will allow you to, for example, run a test until it fails, so you can diagnose in what specific condition it happened and solve that edge case. We were just talking about async await, and test repetition is great news regarding asynchronous code because it's often time where tests are the least reliable because of things like race conditions being hard to catch. It's most likely not a feature you'll end up using multiple times every single day, but it broadens the options you have when testing on Xcode, and having more available data or tools is one of the most important things when debugging and testing. Anyway, I hope you are as excited as I am about those cool new features that will be coming with Xcode 13. The goal here wasn't to deep dive in any of them, but to make you aware and curious about going to look through them for yourself. I highly encourage you to do so, even if it's just on surface level so you know what's coming. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking it and hitting the subscribe button. I'll see you all in the next video, and until then, take care.